So welcome everyone, and yeah, great to be part of this amazing group. Very interested, obviously, in tech, as we'll probably see from some of my presentation as well. So a little bit about me to start with. Yeah, just spent my life in B2B sales. Got a couple of awards and a couple of achievements along the way from MBO, as well as part of a startup that was acquired for 500 million in October 2016. And my company, Sales Startups, has advised over 70 pre-seed to Series A B2B tech startups. So we're in that sort of 5 to 50 employee market in the nascent startup world in the last 5 years. I've also been the top performer and the worst performer in the same year as well. So I know what it's like to be at the VP club, one quarter, and then, almost in probation and performance review in the second half of the year as well. So I've experienced some highs and lows, like a lot of people in sales as well. So I come at it from a quite candid perspective as well. In terms of briefly about my company and a bit of relevance here, my company builds successful sales operations for funded technical founders. So those people from not a sales and marketing background, so they can produce predictable revenue, deliver extraordinary value, and get further funding. So that's what we do. The way I explain it to my friends and mates, in a more simplistic manner, is we are the architect, we are the engineer, and we are the designer for B2B tech companies. So if you were to build a house, you'd obviously draw up the plans. You would then have to obviously build the house and make sure it was sound structurally, and then you'd have to kit it out to your needs. And that's what we do at Sales Startups, in essence, in another way and another analogy. In terms of today, then, we're going to talk about how to uncover the gaps in sales. Our market and understanding is working with founders of tech companies. Obviously, we work with salespeople and marketing and customer success alongside that as well. 3 processes that you need in order to be successful within any startup, I would say. But also, obviously, I'm coming at it from a tech startup angle. And then obviously, like Les said, Q&A afterwards as well. So uncovering the gaps. So we've got to diagnose what's working, what's not working, and how do we do that in what is quite a difficult scenario, as most of you probably know from your founding experiences as well. Where do I start? Well, that's quite a big challenge. The way that we looked at it is we've done a bit of research into this problem. 453 companies, in fact, in this market, 5 to 50 employees. We found 216 unique startup mistakes, right? As you can imagine, for a founder, that is an absolute mind screw as to where the hell you start, how do you solve those challenges. And we were like, how can we simplify this really simply into key areas? We came up with proposition, people, and process. This is just a brief extract, from the research as well on the left-hand side to show you that there are lots of problems. And you'll see this from some of the investment conversations you've held, within this panel as well before, as to what happens. But all problems, in our belief, can kind of be assimilated down into these 3 areas. You find that there's often a major and a minor in terms of the root cause of the issue. So you might have it's more of a proposition problem, say like 80% that way, and you might have it's 20% on a people side. But normally you can have a kind of major and minor in one of these categories. So you can diagnose any problem in your business very, very quickly, and then obviously look to create solutions to those problems. And obviously at this point, we're talking about sales and how that relates to sales, but you could also look at this in a wider perspective as well. And we're going to drill down into these 3 areas, obviously a little bit more detail today, to help you go even further from just a theoretical understanding of business problem solving in a startup. So proposition, people, and process. This is what we're going to be talking a little bit about today in this first bit. So let's break that down a little bit further, right? So proposition, okay, what's in that proposition category? If we were to pick 3 ingredients here, we would need to get the pitch, the pricing, and the partners right. Okay, we can maybe in the Q&A discuss these probably in more detail, because I didn't want to sort of pit about 35 words on the screen with regards to the proposition. So I kept it just the 3 here under proposition. But these are the 3 core elements you need to get right within a scaling company, within any startup, and certainly within B2B tech startups. Moving forward to the people side of the business, you need to get the structure right. You need to get the selection right in terms of selection of talent. You need to get sales enablement. So it's great having selected what you think is a great superstar, but you actually need to onboard them, train them, ramp them up, and make them successful, and obviously manage performance. And then finally, on the processes side of the equation, we need to get 3 processes right, and we're going to talk about these today: the lead process, the sales process, and the nurture process. These are the 3 essential ingredients that no company can really scale at its full potential without these 3 elements in play, and obviously at least a sort of 80-90% efficiency rate as well. So a lot of processes, and we'll talk about, there are lots. We've even done some research into how many processes there are within a tech startup. So we'll take a bit of Q&A as well from the group. So on that note, from the room here tonight, how many processes do you think there are in a typical B2B startup? 100. Any other guesses?
I'd say a bit less than that, maybe 40.
40. Any more guesses?
I'll go limited. Yeah, just into double figures, I reckon.
Just down into double figures. Interesting. So David's probably the closest. There's 24 from our research in terms of core, business processes that need to be in play. Obviously, some have flavors of the master process, so they break down into kind of sub processes. But you can see even sort of the commercial processes as well. Here's a selection of 10 of them. I won't go through all of these, and that's not the point today, but just to give you an idea. So we're going to be talking about the 3 processes we mentioned earlier in order to get your company underway. So lead gen process, let's kick off there. So if you think about, typically what the sales literature you might have read before, definitely when I was, looking at previous texts in the 90s and even in the early noughties as well, this was all, the Brian Tracy effect of sales. So you would have like this event, you'd have a sales call, then you meet them in person and they make a purchase, and then great, they're a happy customer. And marketers always talked about sort of awareness, consideration, decision as this kind of linear client journey that people will go on. But the reality today is a little bit different, okay? So people will, this is just an exemplary flow. It's not necessarily the flow for everyone, but just to show you how many touch points, a lead would probably experience when coming into contact, with your company. If you're interested in this, there's a good article called 0 Moments of Truth. You can just put it into Google and you'll find about Google's research on this as well. It's kind of called the 7-4-11 approach. But basically it's to do with consuming content in various different means on various different platforms, and then coming to a point of where you make a decision, here is the purchase, right? Not this awareness, consideration, decision point that we looked at in the sort of the typical kind of classic sales journey that we all might have heard of or grew up with. I even certainly did. And, I was trained in the sort of the last decade, and we're still talking about awareness, consideration, decision. But this is what we should look at. So it's quite important when we think about lead generation as to how these things fit together. And I think that's where a lot of founders go wrong. It's not identify one channel. It's about how the channels complement each other and compound to create a lead generation engine for your company. So a lot of people always ask me, oh, what channel should I use? What platform should I use? What tactics should I use? There's channels, there's strategies, and there's tactics as well. And they're all slightly different as well. So you can have like LinkedIn, for example. There are about 14 different tactics to give you an idea on LinkedIn. So when people say, oh, I've tried LinkedIn, that doesn't work. Well, one, what tactic have you done? obviously one, and then secondly, what's your overarching strategy to that tactic? And then how well have you executed that tactic as well? So as we know, the quality of the execution is in the effort. So I'll move forward here. So we're only doing sort of 15, 20 minutes. But this is kind of what we would think in terms of lead gen. You need to bring people into your hopper, as we know, as a subscriber. That might be through a sort of submission on a white paper, a download as an example. It might be attendance at a LinkedIn event. It could be lots of different things. But then you also create that lead, create it into often using things like workflows if you've got CRMs or an understanding of them. And then you can nurture that towards an opportunity and then into a customer. Obviously that's simplified, but just showing you. And this is where workflows for lead generation are really important as well. If you're wanting to scale a company very quickly, a workflow just means that you have a kind of enrollment trigger. Some people call them automations. And then you have a series of actions. So for example, you might download a white paper. Then you have an email nurture sequence that's maybe 3 to 5 steps, as an example, off the back of that enrollment trigger, and with the goal of booking a call with you, and then obviously becoming a qualified lead for your company. So that's just a brief example, what I mean by that. So sales process, the second of the 3 processes. So just a couple of, guiding principles here, just picking out a couple that are really important. CRM, needs to be where almost the discussions happen on opportunities, right? A lot of us sort of had this famous point with the Silicon Valley startup that I came from, where the COO said to me, "Oh, James, what's the update on the deal?" And I said, "Have you checked Salesforce?" And they were like, "No, but I still want you to give me an update on the deal." I said, "I thought CRM is the single source of truth." And so we definitely put that in play. And even sometimes management need a little bit of coercing in terms of their own policy. But second thing I would say is keep it simple. And then thirdly, defend your domain. This is the one that I love even more, is the CRM is like a working desk, especially the pipeline element of your CRM. You need to almost sort of charge ahead and warrant to be in that working pipeline. It's almost like, you're on my top, important priorities for this week by getting into that pipeline. So you need to sometimes make a case in order to get into that kind of working desk or pipeline. So I'll go through a little bit. This is some of the new research that's, led by HubSpot in this area as well, about the kind of flywheel effect rather than the classic kind of funnel pipeline effect. It's a kind of re-energizing and cyclical effect rather than it's just down and then it's an end point at the end of the funnel. So moving forward, obviously, I know I'm going quite quickly on some of these things, but this is the 5 keys, and I've simplified as much as I can in terms of a classic sales process. You've got to think of at the top is kind of our internal interpretation in dark blue, and then in the pink is the journey and kind of the thought that the prospect is going throughout this buying experience. So you've got to think, therefore, as to what stage they're at in their own buying journey. And then I call this the 5 keys, which is the questions, the wants, the gives, our questions at that point in time, and the activities that need to be performed in order to move them from one stage to the next stage, with obviously an appreciation of some data fields that people would want to achieve if you're trying to grow a successful and scalable company. So yeah, I won't go through all of these, but just to give you an idea, a lot of people, I found some, even in tech, we love jargon. So we have like SQLs, MQLs, SALs, VALs, all this kind of stuff. Like, what does that actually mean? How does that relate to the customer? Imagine if you went to a customer and said, "You're now an SAL." They wouldn't receive that very well. So let's think about that in terms of terminology briefly. Nurture process, the final one. So in terms of why we need a nurture process, first and foremost, we want to improve the customer experience. Okay, a lot of people come into contact with us, and nurture is multi-tiered. So we're talking about existing customers, we're talking about potential customers. We might even be talking about partners as well in a nurture. So nurture is quite a broad category of processes, but like I said, improving customer experience. Secondly, increasing spend. So as a customer is onboarded, there are certain elements that you want to nurture them with in order to make that next purchase, or potentially make an extension to the agreement or the contract that you've signed. Then thirdly, it's about increasing referrals, obviously connected to the customer experience, but this also could be the partner experience as well. So how do you increase referrals? And then finally, reactivations. So you've got people that maybe you've spoken to before, maybe it didn't work out, wasn't the right timing, they didn't have the right budget, they didn't have funding, whatever it may be. But what are you doing to reactivate those conversations and make sure that then at a latter point that they book in your diary and get a call in? In terms of some of the triggers for the common things that we see for nurture, life cycle stage changes, that's a bit of HubSpot jargon, but basically what that means is, you might move from, prospect to a customer as an example. Loss reason, that's pretty self-explanatory. Some of the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. The final one, just to pick up on, is too many to nurture manually. So I'd encourage you all to think about, you've obviously got some great relationships in this group as well, and in your wider network, but are you nurturing those people on a consistent basis, or have people not heard from you for the last 6 or 9 months when you last spoke to them? So think about that, and that's where a nurture process and some of the outlets are really useful for that. So just to wrap up, one of my favorite quotes as well from Ray Dalio: people make decisions, companies don't. Problems are decisions people did or didn't make. So we know as leaders that we are accountable, and we certainly know that our team members are ultimately the drivers of process. The process is an enabler of people. It isn't the godsend, that we all think it sometimes is as well. So yeah, I really did. I read his book as well. If you're interested as well, I would recommend it. Probably the most successful hedge fund manager in the world. But then finally, if you want to catch up with me, obviously you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and also check out our website as well, salesstartups.co.uk. So that's it from me, Les. Can hand it over to.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, obviously that was an exceedingly quick trot through the presentation. I'm going to pull you back on a couple of things, if I may, if I can get the chance to ask you the first things. I guess, for most of us, we've all been in business, we're all entrepreneurs, and we're all involved in the technology sector. So we kind of hit your mark. I guess most of us would have come through the background of the linear sales process, because when most of us started to sell and started to get involved with selling technical systems, we didn't have the multiple interactions that we get today. I was quite interested by your pinwheel that you had in your presentation, and also the kind of sinoid type thing that you had as a graph rather than a straight line. So for me, that you went through that rather quickly, but I can appreciate. I mean, it's almost like if I was given an analogy, if you, in the old days when you used to write software, it would all be sort of in a linear form. It doesn't work that way now. You can interact with a mouse, or you can have something that triggers it in a different way. And I'm guessing it's a similar thing that you describe here.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's obviously been, as we know, a massive growth in the amount of technology. We have more information to understand where the inputs and where those people are seeing, viewing, downloading, information on us and interacting with us. It's kind of a massive kind of online presence and estate, isn't it? Whereas before it was very proactive, often self-led sales, where you would often do quite a lot of outbound and outreach, to an individual buyer or to a company, and then navigate through that buyer estate to get there. But you didn't know whether they knew who you were, whether you had even viewed your website, whether they had even, downloaded any of your materials at that point in time. You were kind of acting quite blind. But yeah, it's definitely changed, and the flywheel effect is a big thing as well. Is that we need to think of lead, sales, and like I mentioned, nurture as a kind of continuous, cyclical effect. And that's why I mentioned even lead gen. It's like the proliferation of channels sometimes confuses a lot of people, but actually it's, obviously there is an element of selecting the right channels, but then it's the compounded growth effect of how you knit those channels together in order to create a bigger impact in the market. But I see that Paul's got his hand up, so I'll go to Paul with his question.
Yeah, thank you, James. Interesting chat. Thank you very much. Quite inspiring. The question I've got is the processes. Have you seen them change dramatically as a result of remote working? Because we've seen a massive change even over the last 2 years now. And one of the biggest frustrations I've got is, with everybody working from home, what used to be a simple decision loop seems to be spread over goodness knows how many months. I wonder if you've come across that and any advice you can offer to get through that.
Yeah, certainly. I think let's just pick the sales process, as I just read a report from Dale Carnegie today about the HR trends for 2022. It was number 4 on their top 7 trends, which was selling virtually. And there's a bit of a challenge here. One, from a leadership point of view, a lot of leaders have not led virtual teams before. And so there's a big training and skills gap in terms of remote sales leadership. So that's a challenge for a lot of people. And, people have grown up in office environments where that was not the de facto. So there's a skill gap there. I think in terms of what I've noticed on the sort of sales playing field is that the prospects often qualify out quicker. So do often the reps as a result of that as well. So people are wanting information quicker than they were, pre-COVID levels. So they're wanting to know the first call, and we did a bit of research across our portfolio of startups about when you announce the pricing of your product and what impact that has on sales efficiency and sales effectiveness, i.e. to close. And what we found was that between the first and the second call was absolute must in terms of giving an indicative pricing guide to the customer. Whereas in pre-COVID levels, that was definitely not the norm. We were second, third, we would go into a presentation at that point. We would do sort of a customized demo. Then we would talk about pricing normally towards the end of the demo, some indicative, previous customers that we used in startups. That was kind of the norm pre-COVID, but now I think qualifying out quicker, people wanting pricing quicker. I found that actually a lot of people are making decisions quicker. I don't know if that's the norm across, obviously I've only got a view of the startups that we work with, but I think people are making decisions quicker, but they're also evaluating your progress quicker than they were before.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, James. People just seem to disappear quite fast, so that's probably the qualification out, isn't it, really? But you've lost the ability to get hold of them again. So yeah. I think hiding behind the tech, they just disappear. But no, that is really interesting about the second call and pricing. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, James, thank you very much. Very, very good presentation. I hear a lot about HubSpot these days, and I've worked with a couple of companies who've used it. And I think your processes are based a lot on or your ideas might have been inspired by some of the HubSpot stuff. I mean, I don't know HubSpot personally, but I know companies who've used it. And what I've found is that it fails sometimes when the people own it. So you are passionate about the processes, you're passionate about your research you've done and the keys to sort of changing that, making it successful. How do you get that sort of approach in the sales teams themselves? Because when I see the sales teams, and I've sat in some board meetings where sales directors are saying, we don't get enough leads, we're not closing enough, what have you tried? Well, we tried HubSpot, and it sounds to me like they're not implementing it properly. So even though the theory is really good, how do you move from the theory to the actual practice?
Yeah, really good question, Peter. And I heard that actually last week from a Norwegian construction tech company, and they were talking about compliance with the CRM was the way that they put it. So yes, I agree with you that you have sort of theory as, a lot of people talk about the value of CRM. It's not a new concept. It's been here for whatever it is, 50 years. The idea of a database, we called it before, now it's a CRM. But how do you actually implement it? I think first and foremost, you've obviously got to understand the customer journey and that work, as we talked about, and understanding that buying experience. But moving on, a couple of chapters, I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit beyond that, is you've got to paint the picture to the reps and to even the sales leaders, the value of data. And value of data can be expressed in a couple of different ways. It can be expressed in terms of quota attainment. It can be expressed in terms of, revenue achievement of the company. And ultimately what salespeople, a lot of salespeople would be motivated by is money. So, when we look at it, we think of by filling in these certain fields, and obviously there are a couple of tricks in order to make that sort of required and make it part of the process in order to draw down the reports you need. But really, in terms of getting the buy-in, it's the understanding that this is what like 18 players do, and also to show some practical examples of 18 players that filled in the CRM and what it meant to them, what it meant to their earnings, what it meant to their tenure in the company, what it meant to their position and their responsibility, and use those advocates, in order to persuade behavior otherwise, because, then you'll sort the sort of B and C team players out, because they'll be like, well, I'm definitely not jumping up to that level of standard. Whereas the sort of B plus, A minus candidates will be like, yeah, I want some of that action. I'm happy to do the admin because I know that I will overachieve my target and make more money, and I'll stay with the company longer and probably fast track my career.
Great, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Just while we're on that then, James, so in terms of the motivation of the staff, because that's an absolutely critical part of this, and we all know that people at the front end tend to be loners quite often. Getting them to work in teams is difficult, particularly where money's concerned. So it must be quite different then if you've got leads coming in all over the place and the allocation of those leads and then the following up of them. So have you got any advice and guidance on that part?
In terms of how to perform lead qualification in a more effective way, is that the question? Or
well, it is, but it's also about the individuals themselves, how you then motivate them to be part of the team, because we tend to think of it, what's the company objectives, and then based on what the company objectives are, when we come down the tree to what the salespeople's objectives are as a team, and then the individuals. Is it still that same kind of approach you take, or are there any other new tricks that might be on the table?
Yeah, so I mean the evolution of the very top-down thinking has evolved slightly. So if any of you know, like the OKR framework and John's work there, like that's a good place to start in terms of how the top-down has just gone, on a few paces. Objective key results, sorry, I mean by the OKR framework. And I found that is great. And I think the other element that we've added to that in terms of the last 2 to 3 years is we've, especially in smaller teams, because our market's like 5 to 50 employees. So we're probably dealing with teams of, a team maximum, I would say, of 10, 12 kind of a commercial team on average, because often there's a lot in development as well. But I would say a pod system, if anyone knows that, I can obviously share some examples. But what we're saying here is a bit like in the services, or like if you've ever looked at the army, the military, or the SAS, you have this kind of pod structure where it's interreliance and interdependence between team members, and you can do that in terms of the way in which you incentivize your team. And so we talked a little bit about the flywheel effect as well, the kind of, attract, convert, and delight flywheel that HubSpot, got famous for. But, when you have a interdependent commission scheme, interdependent roles and responsibilities, and then also you have the right team members in a pod, I would say the best is kind of a number of 4. So if you're interested, it's typically a kind of lead gen, a customer success, a closer, and an outbound person as well. They're typically kind of the points. You can change the outbound to a marketer as well, is another option as well for that 4. But basically what you're creating is a kind of virtuous feedback loop, and then you've got the commission structure to incentivize people properly, and then obviously you can level that up to the OKR at the company level. And also you can even, what we've done before is actually have competing pods. So you have a team of 4 against another team of 4. And then when you grow, you can do a sort of inbound versus outbound team, and you can create a little bit of healthy competition as well. And that's not just from a sales, conversion point, that's from a marketing, that's from a customer success, and renewals, upsells, the whole party, basically.
Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the customer success piece, because presumably part of the delight definition is the customers actually getting value from what they've purchased, and they would be happy to purchase some more. So in my previous experience, the technical support team and the consulting team were very much considered to be part of the sales organization. So how have you had much experience of integrating the sort of non-sales technical people into this model?
Yeah, certainly. You've obviously, even with the pod structure, just, going back to that recent example, you have kind of team, normally kind of weekly stand-ups to talk about product feedback. And you'll have that pod, with obviously the technical resources talking about product feedback. So you've got product feedback from a marketing angle, from customer success, from a sales, from an outbound prospecting, point of view, as well as skill set within that. And then obviously you can see that from a support angle in terms of tickets, queries, lag effects, within the platform as well, and obviously user behavior. And then what you can do in those weekly stand-ups, you can marry the two to then create a more nuanced and sort of modular approach to product development as well, which is a really nice way of doing it, because in the early stages, you probably know, most of you, that obviously the feedback is really vital to creating a better product. And the feedback loop in a lot of startups is kind of broken. They're like, it's like a leaky pipe. And so you don't really centralize a lot of that information. But yeah, the customer success is always an interesting one, because it does evolve over time, and also the roles and responsibilities in that team evolves over time as well. So it's kind of like most functions, they fragment actually and expand, as you expand, often the revenue, the customers, the markets that you represent.
I mean, just to kind of follow up on that, I noticed you had a case study on your website of a chap from Volume AI who was the sort of chief techie as well as a sales guy. So in your sweet spot for your customers, the rapid evolution of roles is going to be a big part of the journey that you're following with your clients. So there's got to be that sort of inbuilt foundation that sort of provides a solid set of processes, but they've also got to be breakable and adaptable and reconfigurable. So it's just an observation rather than anything else.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I think that's our kind of typical client persona, is that sort of techie founder that is not from a sales and marketing background, and obviously has got some initial customers, got the thing off the ground, maybe got some early stage funding, but now needs to go to the next level. They need to build a team, they need to build proper processes. In that example of Volume with Benoit, they had, it was actually quite an interesting one. It was a pivot from a consultancy into a SaaS product. And, what they did there is they had got, obviously, spent probably 2 years, 3 years building the thing, but actually the market approach was pretty immature. They had leveraged, obviously, some of the relationships to get the early few customers. But in that instance, the market feedback was quite redundant. And also there's different traits as well of like a sort of techie founder than obviously a commercial founder who comes from a different background.
Okay.
Have we got any other questions? Chris or Colin? Andrew, Rich? Yeah, Chris.
Hi, yeah, good evening. I'm fascinated by the HubSpot thing because we actually tried it in-house, and I just couldn't get anybody in the team. I'm a relatively small business, only 8 of us, or 9 of us if you include the part-timers, and we just couldn't get on with HubSpot at all in terms of its philosophy. It sort of didn't fit the management of our current base very easily, so we've ended up with Zoho Begin, and it's fitted like a glove. We tried a couple of others as well as HubSpot. We tried the Dynamics CRM and we tried Salesforce, and just found that there wasn't a fit, particularly with the recurring revenue SaaS customers we have, where you sort of need to manage them on a regular basis, but for quite small deal enhancements and volume enhancements. So it's quite interesting to sort of see another presentation of where HubSpot's supposed to fit, because it definitely wasn't what I got from trying the product. So I think it's all about who you're working with to deploy it, and what sort of location you're trying to deploy it in. So it was interesting to hear a different view. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like, this is not a pitch on HubSpot. I worked for a company that used to integrate Salesforce. So before that was sold. But I think the big thing about HubSpot is that they have obviously made some improvements to the way the pricing tables work as well, which is quite good with MRR and, the increments that you would see in a high volume business as well. So you've got low kind of monthly recurring fees going through. They have made some improvements. I know Zoho, fairly well as well. It's ultimately going to be down to, as we always know, the kind of leadership and their way of working. Like it's there's no sort of one size fits all for these things. It's just often the way in which they work. And obviously I'm pleased that Zoho's worked. And
I mean, it's interesting because you mentioned data, and that's how I've been measuring the success of the CRM products we've tried, because this is the first one where I feel like on a week-by-week basis, I've actually got data that's actually helping me steer the team and support the team better, which I wasn't getting before. And so obviously the team must like it because they're using it. And so I'm getting data.
The data.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's reporting is a big lack of skills, within the wider, like tech landscape as well. The CRMs, I remember even implementing it, in sort of £1 million plus projects as well with some big corporates. I was amazed by no one could really actually draw down reports. And even in HubSpot as well, they've tinkered around a lot with reports, as it was a major loss reason that they lost a lot of deals for. But it is interesting is that there's no proper sort of coaching around CRM, and obviously the reporting is a large element of that. Like you said, it's who you work with, who you implement it with, who's supporting you in terms of what's the value of that data, how are we going to visualize that data as well. There's obviously the selection of the KPIs, which is quite an important part of obviously that measurement as well.
It's quite interesting because it's the first product I've found that just using the filtering directly onto leads and filtering out is just so quick and so easy to do and so easy to remember that I never go to the dashboard page because it's just so easy to get data. Even things like somebody's ran an e-shot and you want to see the bounce backs, it's just so easy to get at that sort of stuff without asking anybody. So I like it as well because, of course, I can sit at 10 o'clock at night with a glass of wine and look at the sales processes and it's quite enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm one of those weirdos as well. I sometimes have a sort of Saturday morning coffee, and I'm looking through source types and progression rates and source types. So
I'm adding extra tags for the filtering. I think we're sad. Good. All of us were sad.
Yeah. But
nice to meet a CRM brother anyway.
Colin, yeah, you got a question. You're on mute, Colin, at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for the presentation, James. I look forward to seeing the video. I've got a client that I'll probably send it to as well, and I assume I can do that all right, Les? That's not a problem.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. The question, bit off piste, but you must have interviewed and seen thousands of salesmen in your role.
Yeah.
So what's your top 3 tips when you're interviewing a fat salesman to find a good one?
Oh, top 3 tips. I mean, for me, it's my top tip would be to design a proper selection process. Mm-hmm. The thing because I'm actually an ex-sales recruiter as well, so I have actually interviewed thousands, of salespeople, and also my company as well. We do talent acquisition for our existing clients as well. So, yeah, my tip is really the designing the selection process in order to get the outcomes. And I'd also, in today's remote selection environment, I would also include some level of objective or psychometric testing to that as well. We partner with a company called Thrive that I really rate as well, which looks at the skills and the attributes for particular role types, and it's indexed by sort of over 1 million candidates as well. So I really like it. If you can have a look at, I can put the website in as well for those that, or you could probably get maybe a more speedy referral if you just send me an email, to be honest. But I can put it in here anyway, because you'll probably get some SDRs sort of pinging you 15 emails, I'm sure. But yeah, that's one of the psychometrics. So it comes down to selection is the unfortunately political answer, Colin. Because that there aren't sort of special tips, because the selection process is, when you're in recruitment, no one teaches you a selection process. When you're a hiring manager, no one teaches you a selection process. So that's a really big problem, because people are throwing candidates to you. You don't actually know how to decipher who's a great candidate and what that selection process should look like. So you end up making some faulty hires, which obviously costs a lot of money. I mean, last year they did a survey in SMEs. It was £125.3 thousand was spent by the average SME in the UK on failed hires. So, and that's the average of 5.7 million businesses.
Yeah, goodness me.
Yeah, it's a big number.
It's good for the recruitment industry, but not so great for the business. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, because ultimately someone will come in and someone will go out, tenure will go down. And we are seeing that. Someone asked me about some of the trends as well within the sales environment. In our world of sales leadership, there is a big trend as well going on. They did a survey last year, which actually was pre-pandemic, and it was 14 months was the average VP of sales tenure. And this year that has gone down to 9 months is the average VP of sales in SaaS. So, and the average and the tenure of those who go past 12 months is only 30% of all VPs of sales in technology. Right. So and this is also backed by a bigger labor trend, if you think about it, which is kind of the portfolio career trend that we know has been growing. Self-employment has been growing substantially. The 40 to 65 market grew 57% in the last 6 months in terms of company registrations year on year. So we're seeing experienced people setting up their own business, having a limited company and working kind of as a consulting, in a consulting capacity. So we're driving down tenures. Also, that's a problem for selection is that you how do you know how to select that person as well? So that's really, really difficult, because people aren't really looking for a 3-5 year sort of leadership role these days. They're looking for a small project. Yeah, big challenge.
James, thank you very much indeed for all of that.